AI has really taken off and it's so much smarter than us, what do we actually have to offer so that we'll still be gainfully employed and working on things that matter and make a difference?
I view AI as a thought partner, not the thought leader. I'm the thought leader, and God is my conduit to that wisdom. And I think my moat against AI is the community itself. It's like, while they could learn the tactics and tools and all that stuff without spending money with me and without interfacing with other humans, but I think from a practical business standpoint, building communities and standing for your value system and using that as sort of the beacon and the lighthouse that attracts your people is the ultimate hedge against being replaced by robots.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It's my pleasure to have Dustin Riechmann with us. Dustin is a serial entrepreneur and the founder of Seven Figure Leap. He specializes in helping mission-driven experts build seven-figure brands by telling their story. Dustin, it's so great to have you on the show.
It's awesome to be here with you, Stephan. I love your show, and of course, you and I have gotten to know each other outside of podcasting, and it's a real pleasure to be here and hopefully be able to impart a little knowledge with your audience.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's start with your story because you came from humble beginnings, right? The meat stick company is where you came from. I'm a vegetarian, so I'm not going to comment. But yeah, I'd love to have you share your story with my audience.
Absolutely, yeah. So before the meat sticks was a marriage business, and before that was an engineering career. So to go just a little further back, I was a practicing consulting engineer for 17 years. And so I did civil engineering and did a specialty in traffic. So a lot of times I'm like, oh, I'm a traffic engineer. And people are like, oh yeah, website traffic. I'm like, no, like car traffic, right? So so that was a big part of my life. And about halfway through that career, I realized I had an entrepreneurial bug. I didn't really know what to call it. I hadn't had any exposure to this sort of stuff growing up. But I had this call where I felt like this marriage ministry work my wife and I were doing in dusty church basements, had a place online. So way back in 2009, in the heyday of blogging, I was like, hey, I think I have something to add. So I created my first website, kind of figured out how to do that. Got in a little bit into the world of SEO and building partnerships and collaborations. And what started as a ministry and a side project pretty quickly became a side business. And with that, I went down this rabbit hole of digital marketing. And for about the last, 8 years of my engineering career, I kind of had these two roles I was juggling all the time of online business builder and full-time, managing engineer. And so 2017, the marketing finally kind of took over, and I had enough courage to leave that identity behind on the engineering side. And so since about 2018, I've been a full-time online entrepreneur. And so that started with marketing consulting and sort of taking any work I could get from anyone who needed anything online. So we were building websites and doing in-person events and all kinds of different activities. And in that time is when I came across this guy, Ryan, who was a local client. He had three different local butcher shops. So really make you cringe, Stephan, as a vegetarian. So he is a third generation family meat business guy. And he said, hey, Dustin, do you know how to sell stuff online? I said, yeah, I do. I've sold some stuff online. And so we formed a partnership in a company called Fire Creek Snacks. And that's the meat stick company. And so we, had a really interesting couple of years where we learned all kinds of crazy stuff and did a dozen trade shows and learned how to sell into brick and mortar stores. Eventually got into Walmart. It was a whole thing. And I learned a ton with that experience. And in 2020, I'll say March 2020, and everyone listening is like, I remember March 2020, right? Where you're at when your business started either crumbling or thriving. And so for me, I was driving from St. Louis to Chicago for the next trade show, just kind of going to keep doing what we've been doing and grow this Fire Creek Snacks business. And I got a phone call that it was not happening. It was closed. I should turn around and head home. Came home within the next couple of weeks. About half my income got evaporated because I was working with local businesses and they were shut down. And I'm like, what in the world? But where this becomes relevant to what we're going to talk about today is summer 2020, in this sort of desperation moment of I can't travel, we can't sample food, can't do any of this stuff. And I've lost a bunch of my local my marketing clients. What am I going to do? And so I found my way onto a podcast as a guest for the first time in summer 2020. And it worked. We sold some meat sticks, and I started building some relationships. And so I was like, I'm just going to keep doing this. I started doing it over and over and over. And after about a dozen podcast guesting opportunities for Fire Creek Snacks, this interesting thing started happening, and people started reaching out to me, emailing me at my Fire Creek email and saying, "Hey, the meat sticks are cool, but like, how are you getting on these podcasts? Like, where did you come up with this story?" That was a really interesting offer. And I started to realize that there was a lot of value in the thing I was doing for entrepreneurs. And so that became the next chapter. And, kind of fast forward to today, for the past 3 years, my full-time focus has been Seven Figure Leap. As you said, we help people grow online brands by telling their story. And the specific vehicle that we often start with people is podcast guesting. So engineering, marriage, marketing, meat sticks, and now we run small group masterminds around this idea of podcast guesting to help people grow their brand and their voice
Yeah.
online.
And when did you make the seven-figure leap?
Just last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a wild ride. So this business, I would say, became real. It became the full-time focus. The actual Seven Figure Leap brand became a thing in 2022. So just several years back. In that first year, we had about 50,000 in revenue. The next year in 2023, we had 500,000 in revenue. Like, it was a literal 10x as I continued to narrow my focus and give up some of the other pursuits and projects. And then last year, we hit that seven-figure mark in 2024. And at that time, I'm sure we get into this if you'd like. At that time, it was literally just me and a couple contractors, and I sort of, was the dog who caught the car and was like, "Uh-oh, like I don't know how to handle this." And I was definitely overextended. But it obviously proved there was a market for this. We had a good thing going. And since then, I've spent a lot of time, money, and energy kind of self-correcting the machine and getting systems in place and all the stuff to make this a more sustainable.
Yeah. So how did you self-correct and build the machine?
Yeah. So Q1 2024, I hit this interesting inflection point where I got to speak at Traffic and Conversion Summit in Vegas. I immediately left there and went to Podfest and spoke in Orlando. And I had these like inbound opportunities coming from podcast guesting, and people wanted me to come teach them about this craft that I had sort of perfected. And it was at the end of that first quarter that I realized we had hit over 250,000 in revenue. And I'm like, "Oh wow, we've hit the seven-figure leap." We hit the thing that I'm always trying to help other people do. And that was pretty amazing. And then that's when I thought I was burnt out, Stephan, but actually in hindsight, I think I was bored. Like, I was like, "Oh, I solved this problem." As the engineering brain, I'm like, I figured out how to do the seven-figure run rate. It's working. And I realized that I was, for the first time ever in my life, like, I didn't want to be on the next Zoom call. I was afraid to look at projections and look at the next quarter. And I was like, not good. I was not in a good place. It was like, I was at this moment that I think a lot of entrepreneurs can relate to at different phases, where I kind of wanted to burn the whole thing down. If I'm being honest, I'm like, well, I did that. Now let's go start something new. But luckily, I leaned into a really key person in my entrepreneurial journey. Her name's Cassie Shea. She was actually a client of mine, and then she's in our mastermind. And so I was around her a lot, and she's like, "Hey, can we have a meeting?" Because we had an in-person event as part of that Podfest event. And she's like, when you get back, can we talk? I was like, "Absolutely." And we had one conversation where she kind of took me through some identity work and helped me get peace with what had happened, and helped me for the first time sort of get a clear vision for what I actually wanted moving forward. And from that discussion, I started taking some action. So I hired a fractional COO for several months. She helped me set up some project management systems and have a CRM for the first time, as crazy as that might sound, with that level of revenue. She helped me hire my first assistant, who's now a full-time executive assistant and the director of our client success in our community. And so last year, for several months, it was operations. Hired that first full-time person, brought on some more contract help, and then this year, as we head into 2025, and actually we're well into 2025. Now I'm able to turn my attention to like systematizing sales and marketing and some of the things that I really am good at and I like, but I can't continue to be the bottleneck for. So hopefully that gives you some insight into sort of how we self-corrected last year and sort of righted the ship after catching a rocket and realizing that I didn't have any handles on where to steer.
Yeah, I'd love to get into a little bit about some of these systems you've built and maybe how you're utilizing AI. But before we do, I just want to comment on something that you mentioned. You felt like you might have been burned out. and you were bored for sure, is what you came to the conclusion on. But this reminds me of a conversation I had on this podcast with Anna Malakian, and the whole topic was around burnout versus overwhelm. And there's a very important distinction between the two, and entrepreneurs get those confused. When you're overwhelmed, you're overextended, you're exhausted, you're like just done, you're cooked, but you're still on purpose. You're in your purpose, you're in your element. But when you're burned out, you've lost that. You're no longer interested. So you could be burned out, which is a combination of the overwhelm, overextended, and the disconnected or disengaged. Or you could be one or the other. You could be disengaged, but not feel exhausted. I'm sure you've come across colleagues in various companies that they're just checked out mentally. They don't care. They've got the energy if they wanted to put it into it, but they just don't care. Like it's not a passion for them. Versus the overwhelm and like, oh, I've taken on more than I can do, and this is just going to lead to exhaustion, or that combination. So I'm curious, hearing that framework from Anna, what resonates with you about that?
Definitely the overwhelm part, right? Like I still had energy for the business. I still loved our clients, and I still loved. It's like I had so many hats on, and I liked all of them, and I didn't want to like give them up. And so when I said bored, the distinction I would make. So I was definitely overwhelmed. I was definitely overwhelmed in the moment and didn't know where to go forward. And when I say bored, I think it's more of a I didn't realize I needed the next creative challenge. So at my heart, I'm a creator, right? And I think a lot of us, are creators if we're entrepreneurs, right? Probably all of us. And I think what I had lost touch with was I'd done all this effort and work, and I'd just been on these stages, and I had hit this revenue mark, and I kind of like solved the thing that I had set out to solve, which is like, how do I get to a 7-figure business as a solopreneur? And in that moment of overwhelm, and in that moment of what I thought was tinging on burnout, what Cassie kind of opened my eyes to is like, that's true. And what you really need to work on is your identity. Right. And so what was happening, I can see in hindsight, was I was holding on to this identity as a grinder, as a solopreneur, as like the guy who gets it all done, as the engineer, even, like I'll just keep solving the problems. I'm smart enough. I can figure this out. And I hadn't yet had the intellectual curiosity to sort of try on a new identity of like, what if I was the CEO of a $10 million business, which is the exercise that she put me through. And at first I was scared of that. And I'm like, well, I have no idea. I don't know if I even want that. Right. And she's like, you don't need to want it. Let's just try it on. Right. And so we literally went through like a Google Sheet exercise of like, here's the identity you're currently living and that you've pointed all your energy and creative juices toward. Let's try on this identity. What would it look like if you were a $10 million CEO? What would you focus on? How would you spend your time? What would you have to give up? What would be the implications of that decision? And so that was super helpful, because what I started to open up was new creative energy towards that might be fun. Like what would it look like if I deep dived into operations? What would it look like if someone else had to do my sales and marketing? I didn't make the choice to do it in that moment, but it gave me way more creative energy and juice. And I think that was sort of the cure to the boredom. It was like, I have been there and I have done that, and there's a lot of work still to do to perfect the things I've been focused on. But trying on a new identity unlocked a lot of creative juice, which immediately sort of took my blood pressure down. And I think it was sort of the immediate cure to my overwhelm. Was like, I'm fine for one. Like, hey, if we just keep hanging out here, I'm okay. Like, this is okay. But there's a better thing to point my energy toward, and there's a different possibilities I can explore. And that was exciting again. So it kind of like put me back in the entrepreneur role instead of the grinder and the deliverer role that I'd sort of trapped myself in.
So if I wanted to try this exercise, I could just have a conversation with ChatGPT. I could tell it, let's do this exercise, the one that Dustin describes in this podcast episode, and I can drop in the link or upload a PDF of the episode show notes page, which has the full transcript. And then it would understand what the exercise was that Cassie put you through. And then it will replicate it, but for whatever my identity, my new identity that I want to try on. So if I want to try on being, for example, a personal development, not guru, but like speaker, author, thought leader of a X million whatever dollar business, what does that look like? What do I have to give up? What do I need to focus on? What do I need to change? How do I need to show up differently? Yeah, really cool.
The distinctions I would say for the ChatGPT transcript or someone who wants to do this on their own, we started very tangibly with like doing. What is Dustin doing? It's like literally this week, what are you doing? How are you spending your time? What are all the different hats that you're currently wearing and doing? And then what would a $10 million CEO do? Not any, but me. Like, if I had to be the CEO of a $10 million company, what things would I choose to do? Speaking, writing, leading some masterminds, but not all of them, those sort of things. And so for me, this is my identity as a $10 million CEO. So from the doing, the next section becomes being. So if I'm going to be the person who does those things, who do I need to be, right? Like I need to be a leader. I need to be someone who is like really into learning leadership principles. I need to be someone who learns how to hire. I need to be someone who delegates. I need to, and so doing is much easier, at least for me, for my brain to process. I'm like activity-based list, great. And then you kind of step one layer up and say being. What does a seven-figure solopreneur be? Who are they at their essence? And then like, how does a $10 million CEO compare and contrast to that? And then from there, the final part of this exercise was simply action. It's like, okay, I've got some clarity now on what I would be doing, who I would be, what are the first vital steps to start to make that shift and start to test what it would be like to step into this new identity. So for me, that was hiring a fractional COO, right? And it was putting together a job description for an executive assistant, because I could immediately look at that list and be like, here's all the things I know I don't want to be doing. and then, there's different people then that could take those doings so that I could step into a different state of being in my identity. And that's precisely what I've done over the past, 16 months since that pivotal session.
Yeah, that's really cool. It reminds me, there's a way to access the right hemisphere of the brain to do exercises along these lines of who do you want to be in the world? How do you want to operate? What do you want to focus on? What do you want to give up or need to give up, et cetera? And from the right hemisphere, you're going to be more creative and more in flow and more in your true self than when you're in your left brain and you're in beta brainwave state and all about the doing and the practicality and like just it's not as creative. So the exercise that I learned from Bill Donius, who is one of my very early guests on my other podcast on Get Yourself Optimized, he's got a book called Thought Revolution. He teaches folks like executives at big corporations how to do this exercise of accessing the right hemisphere. So he has you use your non-dominant hand to write and to not have you kind of talk to yourself in your head while you're doing this. You just let your pen move, let your hand move the pen. And I did this exercise just with a simple question of what totem animal or what's your favorite animal that you relate to the most. With my dominant hand, with my right hand, it was zebra, which I like being distinctive. I like being memorable and, standing out from the crowd, being distinctive. But that was my ego. And when I did it with my left hand, wrote the answer to that question, it was a humpback whale, or maybe it was a blue whale. I think it might have been a humpback whale. And so when I saw what I had written on the page, I was so surprised, because that's not really the kind of animal that I thought I resonated with. But just contemplating it, meditating on that, I realized the truth in it. At a deep kind of spiritual level, that's me, not a zebra. That's just the mask. So I'm curious, have you done this before of non-dominant handwriting? You know about this process?
No, that's fascinating. Actually, I have not done that. I'd say the very mini version of that. So, as you might expect, with the engineering education and all the work and all the times that problem solving is the thing, right? Um, Accessing the right side of my brain, stepping back and being more creative is definitely the more challenging part for me. And maybe it is for everyone. I don't know, but it definitely is for me. And so, the way that I've made some mini steps in this direction is to try to get out of the questions of how all the time, right? And so in the same exercise, I'm sure, that at some point I would say like, oh, a $10 million CEO would do this. And then my brain will immediately default to how. And then like, I don't even want to write down the identity or the role or the doing because I don't know how yet. And so Cassie would continue to challenge me. Don't worry about how. This is not an exercise in how. This is just, a creative exercise. Like it's free form. We're not committing to this. You're not saying this is what you want to do, but we're just like allowing ourselves to detach from the specific process and the how to's.
You're just trying it on.
Yeah, just trying it on. That's exactly the mindset. Just trying it on. Yeah, this we may just set it aside after this. That's fine. Just try it on. And if it's too personal and it's like I just can't do this, well, that's fine. Then externalize it to someone else. If you're giving someone else advice, like, hey, Dustin, you're a coach, you have all these people in your community. If they asked you this question, what would you tell them? And like take it out of your own sort of limitations and your own limiting beliefs. I think those have been useful for me, but I really, Stephan, I like this exercise. It's something I definitely want to
Yeah.
try. So I'll have to go back and listen to your episode. Was it?
Bill Donius. Yeah. Actually, I republished that episode now that I think about it on this podcast. So I did the interview in 2016, but it was episode 204 that I republished the episode on marketing speak. So yeah. 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 It's good. Good stuff. I actually heard him speak at a conference, and I'm like, I got to have this guy on the show. Then my wife, Orion, who you've had a conversation with, Orion, right? Yeah. So she had him on as well a couple of times, actually. He's really cool guy. Anyway, so I don't want to go too far down any particular rabbit hole here, but I do really encourage our listener to try this exercise. I think it's going to be very powerful. Now, you had mentioned systems, and with AI shaking the whole world up, things that we thought would be, months of work to create uh, standards and SOPs and write code and build whatever can take minutes now. So, what are you using AI for, and how are you course correcting based on where AI is taking us?
Yeah, it's a great question. And literally had a discussion last night about this very thing because I'd say most of my focus with AI, I use ChatGPT for ideation as a thought partner. Like I'm launching a new sort of mini program. And so in one long walk and doing audio, conversations with AI, we figured out the title, wrote all the landing page copy, it's like, because it knows me right at this point. And so I think that's a pretty typical use case for anyone listening is like thought partnership, ideation, copywriting. So definitely doing that sort of as a table stakes. I'd say where we're being a little more innovative and a just-in-time thing that we're implementing is more in our delivery. And so to give people a little context, so like we run a 90-day accelerator program about how to use podcast guesting to grow your business. That program and all the alumni from that program are part of a community, right? And so we've got the 7-Figure Leap community. It's housed on Circle. I have a mastermind members that are also in this community. So just give people kind of a picture of who's in there. So about 200 entrepreneurs from all different industries who believe in the power of story. They're podcast guests, in some cases hosts. And, for years, I was the source of information in that community. Someone asks a question and I answer the question. We do a live coaching call and I answer their question. Of course, we still have that. However, one thing, the first iteration of this was about 8 months ago, we created a Dustin AI. So we kind of did that tongue in cheek, but, just trained through Claude, Anthropic. We trained an AI interface within our Circle community that could basically be a 24/7 place to ask questions. Like help me write my podcast pitch, come up with a good lead magnet idea. And we've been using that for several months, and it's good. It's been good, and it's also feels a little too broad sometimes. As specific as our knowledge base is and the focus of our expertise, people still sort of have the blank cursor. They look at it and they're like, "What should I ask it?" And so we started adding prompts, and that helps some. But what we are moving toward now, with some new technology that Circle has rolled out, are AI agents, right? And so soon, we just decided last night sort of the architecture around this, but soon we will have specific agents within our community for specific outcomes. So a pitch bot, a pitch agent that isn't just writing any podcast pitch. It's still using my frameworks. It's still trained on thousands of hours of me coaching people on how to write effective pitches, but it is specific to that task. And what's really cool about it is it continues to learn from the community. So as people write new pitches and I give them real critiques, or they feed things into this AI agent, it continues, of course, to self-optimize. And so we don't have that rolled out yet, but I'm got a very clear picture now for how we can have a AI agent based internal knowledge resource within our community. So that's, literally yesterday, this is sort of coming up. We met with Circle with our advisor there and talked about how to roll this out. What are some of the best use cases for it? And so we're pretty focused on AI as a coaching enhancement and a way to make our community more valuable, which is a value add. And honestly, it's also a hedge. It's like you can go to ChatGPT right now and be like, what would Dustin Riechmann say? Or how would Dustin Riechmann write my pitch? So sort of the intellectual property of my frameworks is sort of out there already because I teach it so publicly. And so I think this will be a great sticky internal resource for people to think first about the community and realize that it's continuing to get optimized by the community, which is a very tight subset of the knowledge base of the world, because these are all people who have a certain value system, think a certain way, and are in a specific industries. So hopefully that's a good kind of real-time example of how we're doing it.
Well, I've got so many so many rabbit holes I could go down with you on this topic. For one thing, I just want to, acknowledge that synchronicity is at play here. It's no coincidence that you had that conversation just a day or two ago. And now we're talking about it on the podcast. That's the way that it works. The synchronicity, the coincidence, the kismet, all that is the scaffolding for this physical reality, for this universe. It's not like a 1 in a trillion chance sort of thing. When you keep getting those over and over again, the odds become, when you stack them together, impossible odds. Yet we live this game that's really rigged for us to get the most out of it. It's rigged in our favor. So you might as well just relax and trust and lean into it. That's actually, we're in a mastermind together where this is a common topic, and we're faith driven. We're entrepreneurs who want to make a difference in the world and deliver God's miracles in daily life. And you got to put your attention where your mouth is. If you say that you are that, then you've got to actually do it in daily life. And we do it. We show up every 2 weeks coming up with great ideas and stories and lessons and so forth. So yeah, it's great to have you on that group.
That's amazing. And I think in the context of that too, Stephan, one thing I'd mention, I do like to go on these long walks, and I do chat with the audio interface on ChatGPT. However, what always precedes that is a time of quiet prayer, right? And so I am walking and thinking and having a usually inaudible, but a conversation with God, and trying to get, trying to find the pull, find the call, find the right questions to ask. And then I've got this tool in my pocket to say, okay, I feel like this is the right next step. Now, AI help advise me on how to implement this. And that's how I view AI as a thought partner, not the thought leader. I'm the thought leader, and God is my conduit to that wisdom. And so I think that's an interesting dynamic. Just in the practical application, I very rarely start with AI and be like, help me decide what to ask you. I'm much more trying to be in tune to God's will. And then I can use AI as sort of an implementation.
Yeah. Yeah, my favorite and I think most important AI tip for how to get the most out of generative AI is to make that connection to the creator before you start prompting. Because what that does is it turns something that is a tool into an interface to the heavens, an interface to the infinite intelligence. So everything is part of that interface. We're kind of living just like a holographic simulation here. It's just a holodeck, right, on Star Trek. But we tend to get lost in it and forget that. Like when you're watching a really good movie and you're in the theater and you completely forget that you have popcorn on your lap. It's like I'm in there. I'm in the game. But you got to continue to remind yourself, and the Hebrew word for personal prayer is hitbodedut. And I want to be in connection with the Creator all day long, but at a minimum, I carve out a half hour a day in personal prayer to talk to God and listen to Him and get the guidance. And when I use AI with that kind of intentionality and that level of vibration, I 100% get way better results. I'll struggle for an hour on something like podcast covers that are generated by ChatGPT and just don't work. And then I'll connect, I'll ask for divine assistance, and then the very next one is the one. It's like magic.
I think that's been my experience. And then the third leg of this triangle, I guess, or this third leg of the stool is humans, right? Like I also still go to masterminds, like the one you or I in. I lead masterminds. I go to in-person events because that's also another way God speaks to me is through other people and through their experiences and their insights and their wisdom, right? And I think AI is a good adjunct to all of that, but at least in the way I view it, is not a replacement for
Yeah.
either.
Yeah. And this idea that when AI has really taken off and it's so much smarter than us, what do we actually have to offer so that we'll still be gainfully employed and working on things that matter and make a difference? It really is your connection to the creator, your connection to source or whatever you want to call it, that is the higher intelligence, the master of the universe, the all that is. And when you come to the game with shared values, that's really what will attract customers or clients to you is those shared values. If I'm faith driven or if I'm spiritual or if I'm into personal development and the other person is, why would they choose me over a competitor? Why would they choose me over an AI based solution? Because they relate and resonate and feel that connection to the shared values.
Yes, that's 100% been my experience. And I was kind of talking about the practical application of how we're incorporating AI within the community, but that community is very much by design, right? And while AI can help you write podcast pitches and coach you on how to do good interviews and all those things, what it doesn't have is the collection of people with common values. So I think you're spot on, Stephan. I feel like it was, there are no coincidences, and so is a belief I have, and so not coincidentally, over this 3 year journey of this new business that I outlined earlier with Seven Figure Leap, there's different inflection points, but about 16 months ago, we made this decision of like, this really needs to be community first, right? Like we were doing things in cohorts. So there's always like mini communities. Those mini communities were very powerful, but turned into themselves, right? It's, hey, 12 people, 12 people, 12 people in cohorts. That's great. But once we allowed those 12 people to be in a larger community and we invited alumni into this experience and then the mastermind members to be part of it, I think we'll see. I think my moat against AI is the community itself. It's like, while they could learn the tactics and tools and all that stuff without spending money with me and without interfacing with other humans, we ultimately like to be in tribes. We like to be with other humans, and we do need curation, and we do need someone who's going to hold the value system and be the curator and the kind of gatekeeper of who gets into this community and how to and protects it and all those things. So yeah, anyway, we can go down a deep philosophical rabbit hole, but I think from a practical business standpoint, building communities and standing for your value system and using that as sort of the beacon and the lighthouse that attracts your people is the ultimate hedge against being replaced by robots, at least for.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you use the term moat. A moat in rule number one terminology, which is Phil Town developed based on the methodology that Warren Buffett uses. Rule number one is, of course, don't lose money. And a moat is a durable competitive advantage. And there are 5 or 6 different kinds of moats, according to the rule number one investing. Anyway, by the way, I interviewed Phil Town on Get Yourself Optimized. Fabulous interview. So if you don't want to lose money in your investments, I encourage you to listen to that episode. But yeah, it's just a moat. If I could just kind of summarize what we've been talking about for the last few minutes in a sentence, it would be that the moat of the future in the era of AI is that shared values and the community that you offer with those shared values with your constituents. Yeah. Awesome. Now, you talked about several times that you like talking to ChatGPT. I think this is really an important distinction because a lot of people are just used to the typing interface. And I had breakfast with Jay Abraham, and I was giving him a hard time about that he's not using ChatGPT in audio mode. And he had never tried it. So I whipped out my phone and I showed him how easy it was. And then I had it kind of come up with some crazy, brilliant ideas involving him and Tony Robbins partnering on some things. And it was actually pretty darn good. And it's so easy to just talk to it and not feel like, oh, I got to sit down. I need to get my ducks in a row. I need to pull out the documents that I want to upload to help it base its answer on. No, you just have a conversation. Now, you called it a conversation partner. I would maybe push back a little bit on that, and because I don't want to anthropomorphize the AI. I want it to be, in my mind, an interface to the infinite. So just like anything else, Garen Jones, who I interviewed not long ago, a homeless person knocked on his window. He was living in his car at the time, so really down in his luck. And this homeless person was asking him for money, and Garen yelled at the guy, told him, "What do you think? I have money? Get out of here," and the guy goes away. But as he's leaving, he screams at Garen, "Change your mindset, change your life." And that changed everything for him. That was like the voice of God speaking to him. He now has a book out. He's a mega millionaire now, multiple millions. And his book is called Change Your Mindset, Change Your Life. So that in that instance, it wasn't ChatGPT or Claude giving him that output. It was a homeless man. And if you can see that the spark of God is in absolutely everyone and everything, including AI, you'll have an easier time navigating this world.
Yeah. And for me, just real practically, I'm a verbal processor, right? It's probably why I'm drawn to the median of podcasting. Before there was a ChatGPT audio mode, I use Voxer with some peers and we have audio conversations asynchronously. And I would find myself just talking to Voxer while I'm on long walks because it's just the movement. And so there's the kind of download, the prayer to kind of prompt me. And then just the physical movement and talking is just a way that I'm really, I guess, gifted, to process things, to process thoughts. And so now I have ChatGPT and yeah, the audio mode is really powerful because I can literally I can talk for 10 minutes and then it doesn't judge me and then it distills all that and then asks me the questions it needs to ask me. And so, yeah, if someone's listening and they haven't tried audio mode, especially if you would identify as like a verbal processor.
Well, even if you're not, even if you just commute to work or to the gym or whatever, rather than using Otter to capture your thoughts and transcribe it, use ChatGPT. It captures your input and turns it into text, and it will give you questions back to help you contemplate that further and help you to refine your ideas. And then,
And it gets to know you better, right?
yeah,
So that the next time it's got better prompting or better context for the things that you talk about. Yeah. So I think that's a super hack if someone hasn't used it or they're not sort of in a pattern of thinking about, hey, you should listen to podcasts. Obviously, Stephan and I believe in that, but you should also have some time to process your thoughts and to ask better questions. And I think using the audio interface for ChatGPT is just a wonderful
yeah,
gift.
yeah. I never listen to music, almost never. It's too costly.
Yeah, I do while I'm working. That's just maybe an ADHD thing, but I like to listen to music while I work. But yeah, anytime I'm away from my computer, I very rarely listen to music unless it's a live performance and I'm there for that experience.
There's certain kinds of music that puts you into a flow state and other kinds of music that jars you out of it. I learned about this while interviewing Will Henschel, who's the founder of Work at, what is it called? Work at Will, with an at sign instead of AT. And it's an app that streams music that puts you into flow state. Yeah, I actually had him back on Get Yourself Optimized for repeat appearance, and then he talked about his near death experience, and that was wild as well. So yeah, really cool stuff. But yeah, we only have a limited amount of time before we've got to wrap this episode up. But I just want to encourage our listener here to explore some of these other episodes and all these various tools and techniques that we're discussing. This isn't just for edutainment, like passive listening, keep you occupied while you're doing something else. Like, apply this stuff in your life. One other AI thing that I want, actually maybe two little AI things that I want to talk about before we change over to podcast guesting. Are you familiar with Delphi and AI clones and trained on the corpus of all your life's work? You feed it all this and then it answers.
I haven't used it. I am familiar. One of our clients is in the marriage coaching space, and they have been experimenting with this as a. It's like this fine line, right? Like the way he was originally thinking about it was, hey, we can use our. I don't know if you call it our Delphi. I don't know how you identify it, but use Delphi. They have books and all these thousands of hours of coaching, and like it could be the coach. And I was like, it could, but for your audience, do you want it to be the coach, or do you want to be the coach and it could be a community resource? I think positioning is important, of course, with marketing, and not like inviting it to eat your lunch.
But here's the thing: like AI is gonna disrupt or disintermediate you anyways. So you might as well be ahead of the curve and disrupt yourself, right? That's actually Jay Samet's tagline: is disrupt yourself or disrupt you. That's the name of his book. So if you get ahead of the curve and you feed an AI like Delphi your corpus of knowledge, and it prevents your past or current customers from just cutting you out of the equation and asking ChatGPT to act as if it's you, because it has access to a lot of public information about you, but it doesn't have access to all your private like trainings and coaching calls and all that, where that you can upload, and then you have a leg up with your Delphi clone versus just a Chat GPT being prompted to act as if you're Dustin.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and that's basically what we created with Dustin AI. It was before my awareness of Delphi, but yeah, I think the same general idea of putting that behind a paywall, basically, right? Like there's the public stuff from interviews like this and speeches and stuff that's been on YouTube, but there's the deep, intimate conversations that happen only on private coaching calls that get captured. And so our interface for that has been Dustin AI, which is only in our community, right? There is no way to access it otherwise. I think it sounds like Delphi would be another way to do that, where you control access to it. And so you can still monetize your corpus, as you put it. You can monetize your body of knowledge, private and public. And I think important, and one of the lessons I've learned with Dustin AI, importantly, making it a very intuitive interface so people know how to actually access that knowledge and not get confused.
Yeah. Well, you can talk to, at least with Delphi, you can talk to it as you could talk to ChatGPT, like we were describing. And in the case of, let's say, Jay Abraham, he's got the JAI built with Delphi. He's got a huge corpus of knowledge with, I don't know, tens of thousands of hours of video trainings and everything else that he's created, books and books and books that he's written, etc. It's incredible. That is the gold standard as far as Delphi is concerned. That's the one that they show off. The Jay Abraham uh, AI clone is the one that they show off to prospects. Yeah. Okay. So one other AI question, and then we'll move on to guesting. Now you mentioned Circle has AI agents. Now there's a distinction I recently heard. I think it's an important one, and that is there's a big difference between AI agents and agentic AI. AI agents being like the little widgets or tools that will do a specific task. It'll do it better if you give it a better brief. But agentic AI is essentially like workers that have more autonomy and more problem solving ability and ability to kind of collaborate and work with other agents. And that's a game changer. That's a new level in the AI revolution. What are your thoughts on that?
uh, Believe it, or I'm not there yet, right? So, yeah, the application we're talking about is very much an agent. It is very much like an interface. I view it as like an self optimizing interface, I guess is the way to say it, right? That's specific to our community and trained on our knowledge base that continues to refine itself based on the growing knowledge base of our community as we get new members, we get more use cases. And that's it. It's like, yeah, it's not agentic or agenic in a way that it's going to, I guess, expand its own scope. I don't know if that's the right way to look at this. So yeah, you know, I'm not, I don't know, on the bell curve. I'm like probably a little bit right of center. Like I like AI and obviously I'm using it. I'm definitely not the trailblazer pioneer trying all the leading edge stuff. I'm definitely not that. And I think that's in part because my clients tend to be just a little behind me. And so I'm trying to be ahead of them enough without getting so far ahead that it just like, it loses its practical value because they don't even understand that it's a use for them or a possibility for them. So yeah, I don't have any deep thoughts on this part, Stefan. I'm pretty aware, like I've read the headlines, but I can't say that I've really used the agentic AI.
Well, I think it's, as you say, it's not really there yet. What I've heard or read is that next year is the year of agentic AI. And then the year after that, or maybe like later in this year. And then the year after that is robotic AI, where it's cleaning your toilets and, doing all sorts of things that it's taken our creative work away from us first, unfortunately. So I love to write or I love to do art or play music or whatever. No, you don't get to do that anymore. AI takes that first. You still get to clean your toilets and do your dishes. And then it'll start taking that work away. And then the year after that is AI superintelligence. That's what I've heard.
Which is exciting and frightening as it's probably.
Well, I'm an optimist. I choose not to be frightened. Fear is false evidence appearing real, and I know that everything, the way that God has orchestrated this universe, is everything is always for the good without exception. So if it seems like a bad thing, I just need to zoom out more, and I can see the good in it. Like it's all for our spiritual refinement, one way or the other. At the end of the day, we're all safe. We're all going to be we're all going to be high fiving at the other end of it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about guesting and what your framework is for that. What are some of your best tips for that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to make the segue, one of the questions that comes up a lot, when I spoke at Traffic and Conversion, which was, I don't know, 16 months ago, 90% of the agenda at that marketing conference was AI this, AI. It was literally AI everything was like the tagline, right? And so when I got on stage and had this opportunity, I'm like, AI is awesome. AI, we use AI tools with what we do, but I'm still very bullish on the fact that human to human interactions, human to human conversations, the shared values, the shared insights, these things that you and I have been talking about around mostly around the topic of AI still prevail. And that I feel that podcasting remains sort of a pure marketing form in that sense. And that, yes, there right now there could be an AI Dustin and an AI Stephan having this interview without us in the room. That happens. That's a thing. However, I think it misses a lot of the nuance, context, emotion, the things that make us human. And I believe that for as far forward as I can at least envision, we're still going to have this craving to learn from other humans, connect with people, be in tribes, stand around the campfire and tell stories. And so podcasting then, in my view, remains relevant today. And I think it will remain relevant hopefully for a very long time. So that's sort of the transition, I guess, from AI into like, why does podcasting matter with all the stuff that we've just been talking about? I think it still matters. And so podcast guesting, I think like, why focus on that? Well, you heard my story a little bit, right? Like with the meat stick company, and I kind of I got forced into this new way of marketing, even though I knew all the things with SEO and paid ads. And, I've been doing digital marketing for a decade. Like, why podcast guesting? I think there's some really unique opportunities here. I'd say the main one, without getting into all the technical stuff, is it is a human to human platform. And with that comes both I'd say the predictable results that you'd expect from marketing. So if you think about like the linear path, like, hey, if I do 5 times as many podcasts, I get 5 times as many leads. That's all pretty true, right? Like I'll grow my email list, I get some sales. The thing that makes it exponential and the thing that makes it much more fun is the unicorn effect, right? Where one relationship can actually change your whole life. And in doing podcast guesting on repeat, you just increase the surface area of opportunity to meet new people and have high quality conversations, both like what we're doing. I get to know Stephan on a deeper level. Maybe there's something here. He's like, I got to introduce you to this client, and his client ends up being a client of mine, or they become a referral source. All the people listening to this, of course, have a much deeper understanding after an hour of hearing what makes me tick and the way I think and the things I value. And then there's all the other guests on this show that I now have the opportunity to have some sort of relationship with, because we have this shared connection around being on this show. So I think as an overarching reason to pursue podcast guesting, you get to tap into other people's established audiences. You get to use long form educational content instead of just social media snippets. And I think the real differentiator in this is the human to human nature of it unlocks step changes in your growth. And at least it has for me and our clients. So that's sort of the why, I guess. And then do you want me to jump into our framework and sort of the how this works in the way that we?
Actually, before you do, I'm curious to hear what one relationship has most changed your life. Business relationship. I mean, clearly your wife is your probably number one, I would imagine. But
I didn't meet her on a podcast. Actually met her back in high school. But yeah, so man, there's so many. I'll give 2 quick examples. In the Fire Creek stage of this journey, I was on a podcast talking about the entrepreneurship story behind Fire Creek Snacks. This young guy named Daniel reached out. He's like 25 years old. He's a mountain biker, and he's like, "Hey, I really like your meat sticks." I'm like, "Great." He's like, "Can we have a call?" And this call ended up being, it changed my whole trajectory, because he was the first person that ever paid me as a coach. So he said, "Hey man, I'm trying to grow this YouTube channel. I do real estate investing. Can you help me?" I said, "Yeah, sure, I guess. I don't know. No one's ever paid me for this kind of work." And so we figured out an agreement, and I started coaching this young guy, and it worked. He had a lot of good success growing his YouTube channel using the same methods that I was using for podcast guesting. A quick side tangent is his wife. I ended up coaching his wife, and she ended up leaving her corporate job at Sam's Club at the Walmart Corporation and became a designer on the HGTV show using the same kind of mindset and pitch techniques and things that we teach. So that was a fun thing. But also Daniel worked at Walmart himself, and he was in the finance department at Walmart. And he made a connection for me internally, which led to a call, which led to another call, which led to this burgeoning relationship with the head meat snacks buyer at Walmart. And it took 2 years. It wasn't an overnight thing, but over the course of 2 years, we ended up on the shelves at Walmart, which of course was a big financial win and a huge credibility boost for our brand. Did being on that first show get the CEO of Walmart to say, Dustin, we got to have Fire Creek snacks on our shelf? No, but it led me to Daniel. Daniel led me to the Meat Snacks Buyer, which did eventually lead us into our biggest commercial win of that company's existence. So that's one relationship, and that was multifaceted because he also got me into the coaching world for the first time. He ended up becoming my first small group member in my group coaching program, and which has eventually led to the work that we do now. So that was really fundamental. And I would say on the 7-figure leap side, there's millions of not millions, but there are hundreds of examples for sure. I'll just say back to Cassie, the person I talked about who coached me last year. She heard me on a podcast. She reached out. She was in this major life pivot in the early part of 2023. She had written this sort of memoir book, and she's like, I've been doing podcasts, but it doesn't feel right. And I'm like, well, tell me about your professional background. And she had this amazing professional background in operations and SaaS startups and things. And so I just helped redirect her energy, like forget the sunk cost of the book that you probably shouldn't have written at this stage, and let's focus on your business. And within like 2 weeks, she had made about 30 grand in new sales. And within the course of the 90 days, she became like a top case study. She was like well into the 6 figures, spending 90 days with me in the second cohort ever of that accelerator program, our flagship program. And so she became a top case study.
Awesome.
And she's still in our mastermind. She was a founding member of the mastermind. She actually helped me name 7-figure leap. And I mentioned last year, around this time last year, she became my coach because now she's really tuned into her calling around identity work and helping people get out of this zone that I was in last year. So her helping me unlocked way more growth for this business, and her helping me helped her get more clarity on what she really wanted to do in her own business. And now she's got, multi-6-figure business. So there are literally countless examples of this, but those are two real humans that I would say changed the game for me, both for Fire Creek, and then they both led into major inflection points for this business. And I met them both just by podcast guesting with no strings attached. I have no idea who's listening. They both reached out to me as a result of appearances and just needed some initial help, which led into these like really.
That's awesome. How much is it to work with you and be part of your program?
So our core program, Podcast Profits Accelerator, is a 10K program, and really unique in that is it has an ROI guarantee, and we don't lead with that. I'm just I'm saying it here on the podcast because I think it's an important thing for entrepreneurs to consider. The ROI guarantee makes it a very double-sided opt-in, if you will. Like, yes, you have to want to work with us because that's a significant investment, a 10K investment. And I have to want to work with you, and we have to really vet you because I am basically becoming your success partner, right? We're not taking any ownership. There's no rev share or anything like that, but I'm standing behind the results that we deliver. So it's a 10K program. And then again, just kind of since this is marketing speak, to talk about the offer just a little more. About half the people that come in just pay 10K and they're like, hey, I'm good for that. This is great. We're going to be together. And then about half are on a payment plan that goes over the course of a year. So an interesting structure to our offer is the core program, the cohort that you're in is 90 days. But from day one of that, you're in that larger community that I've been describing with all the alumni and all their connections and all the other activity and resources and workshops and Dustin AI and agents and all the stuff. And so it's a year-long experience, with the first 90 days of it being an accelerator that's a much more, intensive cohort-based program. So we have some people that just pay up front, and then some people spread that over the course of a whole year, if that makes more.
Okay. And do they pay more because they've spread it out?
Yeah, they pay $1,000 a month. So ultimately they pay $12,000, but they're spreading it out over a year. And we've never had anyone ghost us, but that's always a risk. If they get hit by a bus, obviously we're taking more risk of them completing the payment plan, and therefore there is a premium if they want to spread it out.
And what's the specifically the ROI guarantee is they need to make that 10K back in additional sales, or okay.
They make 10K in new revenue within the 90 days of the accelerator as a result of the work that we do, or I work with them until they do, right? And so and obviously the caveat with that is they have to actually show up and do their side of the work. Yeah. Which again, because we are vetting people as they come in, and because we live very much by our value system, literally out of several hundred clients, there's been 0 cases where someone I won't say there aren't circumstances where people don't like show up over the 90 days because people have health crises and family emergencies. Yeah, and that stuff happens. Of course, we let them plug back into a future cohort. We've never had a case where someone's like, I want a refund or this didn't work, or, it's 100% success. Now 100% success, has its own caveats because we're humans. But yeah, I've been very, very proud of that. And the inside baseball on that, Stephan, yes, of course, part of that equation is the podcast guesting. That's what we're doing. That's what we're teaching. But very often, 90% of the time, they reach that benchmark even before they do podcasting because they're plugged into a new community. They're getting coaching. They're getting a new mindset. We help them refine their offer. I'm a story brand guide. So we help them with their messaging on like day one. And so there's some really immediate returns that happen before they ever even publish a podcast interview. And so the podcast is sort of the insurance policy. I was like, you will definitely get it because you're going to be doing podcasts. But very often it happens just through the insights and the initial connections that happen just from getting into.
Yeah. I love the story brand framework, by the way. Yeah. Really good stuff. Donald Miller is on my Dream 100 wish list of guests I want to have on.
Nice. Mine too. Here's a story I should say more often, and it won't even be a story, but StoryBrand actually hired me first. So in spring 2023, when I was getting this all figured out, through a human connection, actually it was someone, Cassie, introduced me to this woman named Macy. I had a phone call with her, and she kind of left out the part until the end of the call that she worked for StoryBrand. She was the director of certifications at the time. And she was just asking what I do. And I was asking her about the work she does with authors. And she's like, I should really be in your program. I'm like, that'd be amazing. She's like, let me talk to my boss. I'm like, wait, you have a boss? And so as it turned out, her boss was Donald Miller, and she worked at StoryBrand. And so StoryBrand actually hired me to train Macy. So she was in my group. And then she went back internal to StoryBrand and basically taught our framework internal to StoryBrand. And as I got to know her and StoryBrand, I fell in love with the whole thing. And so then I ended up basically giving all the money back, gave them $10,000 back, and I became certified as a StoryBrand guide, as they call it. And at this point, we've had over 30 StoryBrand certified people in my program. And so there's a lot of overlap between the two communities because they have a shared value system as well. People believe in the power of story. They're high ticket service providers. So it became a very good investment. But I guess the short version of that is StoryBrand is my client, which is pretty awesome, but I don't often lead.
Yeah, you totally should. That's amazing. Well, congratulations. Now I know we're at time here. We didn't really get into the framework. Maybe we should just point them to your podcast guest scorecard to take a next step. And then if they want to learn more, they should work with you.
There you go. Yeah, it's a simple 5-step framework with an emphasis on its purpose, plan, pitch, perform, profit. And there's lots of interviews with me out on the internet if you just want to hear the framework, including on my own podcast. We put a big emphasis on that last P, which is profit. So our primary objective is helping you grow your business using podcast guesting as the vehicle to do that. Yeah, and as Stephan said, we've got a cool resource. It's podcastguestscorecard.com. And as it sounds, it's a simple scorecard that's going to go through and help you. It's going to walk you through the 5 Ps with your own personal experience and help identify areas that you could make some immediate changes to find the right shows, tell the right stories, have a better call to action, and just kind of see how podcast guesting would work for you. And of course, that'll get you on our email list and get you all the free resources and things that we have for folks. We work with, less than 1% of our audience. We're almost all in the business of free knowledge sharing. And yeah, so podcastguestscorecard.com. And then, our home base is sevenfigureleap.com. If you just want to hear more of my story or listen to our podcast, that's
awesome. How many episodes do you have?
I just started last year. I wore a false badge of honor for a while, Stephan, of like, you don't need a podcast, just be a guest, because of course I teach podcast guesting. And then I realized that was foolish, and I'm leaving at least half the equation off the table. So we are about 75 episodes in at this point. We started about a year and a half ago. We've never missed a week, so we started a weekly show. The very first episode is Cassie Shea, who I've mentioned numerous times now, interviewing me as a guest on my own show and unpacking why I do this, what 7-figure leap means, sort of my entrepreneurial journey at that point. And then she came back 1 year later and talked about in more depth the things that we talked about hitting the 7-figure threshold, what that felt like, the changes I'm facing. So now we've got an annual tradition. So I got to keep the show going, if nothing else, so that every 52 episodes, there's me being interviewed on my own show about my own journey, which has been a lot of fun. But yeah, about 70 episodes in today.
Well, you are pretty darn cool, Dustin. I'm really I'm really impressed. And
I think that's a high accolade from you. So I really do appreciate it. Obviously, you and I get to know each other on a more personal basis. We don't get to talk business very often. So this was a lot of fun.
all right, thank you so much, Dustin. Thank you, listener. Don't just use this as edutainment. Please put some of it, something, even just one thing, into practice, into action in your life, and make the world a better place. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.